Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Thank you very much for joining us today for the second webinar in a series of webinars being organized by Teaching at the Right Level Africa called TaRL Talks. The first webinar is available in recorded form. If you were not able to join but would like to access the recording, do drop us a message on social media or on email, and we would be happy to send you a recording. Today's webinar is titled Empowering Educators, Insights on Effective Teacher Support for Teaching at the Right Level from Research and Practice. We have an exciting lineup of speakers for you today who will draw on their research and experiences to highlight the core elements that foster effective teacher practices and promoting lasting student learning outcomes in TaRL interventions. So very happy to have with us today Brad Olsen, Daniele Ressler, Morgan Kabeer, and Dr. Andreas de Barros, Dr. Vikram Kamath Cannanure, and I will be introducing them as we move along in the webinar. So thank you once again for joining us, and a big thank you to our speakers. Just some housekeeping before we get started. You all will see that there is a Q&A box in which you can enter your questions for the panelists as you hear them speak. I will just enable the chat function. Thank you, Eleanor, for pointing that out. The speakers will try to answer all your questions in the Q&A box, and we may take some questions to be answered live as well. Will depend a bit on time. So thank you once again for joining us today. So for today's session, we wanted to just get some insights from you before we get started. So we're going to do a quick Mentimeter. My colleague will just share on the screen the details for the Menti. So you have to go to menti.com and put in the code that you will see on your screen in just a minute. If we can also have the details in the chat box, please. So here you see, you go to menti.com and put in the code 45516858. That's 45516858, menti.com. You have the details in the chat as well. Thank you, Arlene. We can stop sharing now. So you can go to menti.com 45516858. So tell us, where are you joining us from today? Florida. Oh, that's nice. Denmark. Exciting. New York. Angola. Lagos. Amazing. Oxford. Uganda. Cape Town. India. Wow. We really have a truly global audience today. Guatemala. Fantastic. Very nice. Suffolk. Ghana. Oh, wow. Lots of people from Kenya, India, Uganda. That's fantastic. Great, thank you so much. It's very nice to see the diversity of audience we have with us today. Great, Cape Town, Liberia. Lovely. Malawi, fantastic. Zambia, Jordan, Spain. Very interesting. Great. I'm also going to enable the chat in a minute. So if you'd like to say something in the chat, feel free to do so. And you should be able to do that. Great. So the chat function is enabled. If you'd like to say something to us in the chat, feel free to do so. Also, thanks. In the Q&A box, we'll reserve the Q&A box for questions. So thank you for those of you who've put your locations in the Q&A box, but we'll keep those for questions. Hi from Ivory Coast. Great. So for those of you who managed to get onto the menti.com, great. We have another question, Tanvi. What's the one thing you hope to learn from this webinar? If you'd like to share, it's menti.com. You see the code on top, 45516858. Please go to menti.com and use the code 45516858. Great. So what do you hope to learn? Practical approaches to TaRL, lessons learned, how is TaRL being used in the classroom, how to get teachers to adopt TaRLs in classrooms when they have a curriculum to follow. Seem like all out of syllabus questions, but we will try to get to them in the Q&A. Possibilities of teachers incorporating TaRL principles into regular classes. Very interesting. I hope the speakers are seeing what all our audience is hoping to learn from your presentations today. So do try to shed light on some of these aspects as you present: teacher motivation, how to support teachers, how can teachers effectively deliver, managing TaRL and curriculum, the role of an educator in 21st century education demands, what has proved to work, how to maximize teacher effectiveness. Great. Fantastic. Thank you. Many of you have managed to get onto the Menti, but if not, we hope to hear from you. You can still go to menti.com, use the code 45516858, and tell us what you open here. Great. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Very, very interesting to see what are some of the things we're hoping to learn from today, from the webinar today, and I hope we're able to get through some of those at least. I'm now going to invite our first speaker for today, Brad Olsen, who is Senior Fellow, Global Economy and Development at the Center for Universal Education at the Brookings Institution. Brad's work centers on research and policy around the scaling of educational innovations for systemic improvement in low and middle income countries around the world. His work focuses on teachers, teaching and teacher development, school reform, global comparative education, and qualitative research methods. And his most recent book is Teaching for Success, Developing Your Teacher Identity in Today's Classroom. So we actually couldn't have anybody more appropriate to kick us off today. So welcome, Brad. Thank you for joining us, and over to you for your opening remarks.
Great. Thank you so much. I am, as you all heard, Brad Olsen, and I'm a senior fellow at the Center for Universal Education at the Brookings Institution, and I'm delighted to set the context a little bit for the research presentations that are coming after me. I really want to thank the organizers of this webinar for inviting me. I think this is going to be a real treat for us to learn from these researchers. I just want to talk for a few minutes about teacher support and teacher development. What I really want to do is really say three things. I want to talk about teaching as a system. I want to give a little bit of history around teacher professional development and support. And then I want to make an argument that teacher agency really matters in how we think about improving education in low and middle income countries at the system level. So the first thing I want to talk about is to understand that education is an ecosystem. It's not a machine, it's not a set of rigid parts, it's an organic system in which multiple parts at multiple levels are interdependent, and therefore if you change one part, it's going to change how the other parts operate. The second thing about this is to understand that at the center of any education ecosystem is teachers' work. I really believe that it's the instructional core, that place, whether it's inside schools or outside schools, where teachers and learners come together to engage in work toward individual and collective growth, that is the center of education reform. And any ed reform, any intervention, any education program that doesn't penetrate that instructional core is not going to succeed. The third point to make here is that teachers and teaching as part of the instructional core is a complex system of its own. We can't separate teacher recruitment from teacher support, teacher professional development from teachers' working conditions, teacher accountability, student assessment. All of those parts fit together in complex ways. And so if we're going to think about supporting teachers, we need to understand that the whole system of teachers and teaching need to be supported simultaneously. I want to offer a very short sort of context-setting history of teacher professional development and support. Much of the work of teacher professional development in low and middle-income countries, in many ways, is a history of bringing Western global North teaching knowledge and approaches to these global South locations. That's a fact. How people feel about that fact is open for debate. Some people think that's a good thing. Other people have real concerns. I'm going to leave that debate out for right now, but I want to mention that there was a traditional approach at the end of the 20th century where teacher professional development support didn't work very well. About the beginning of 2000, we moved to a new approach where we thought about how teacher support and teacher development need to be ongoing. So we have coaching and we have mentoring, an understanding that teachers are not all the same and different kinds of teachers ought to have their support addressed in different ways, and that we should think about teachers as learners, not as passive recipients of reforms. Beginning in about the pandemic, we moved to still a third way. And here what we did was we talked about how, and research finds this to be true these days, the delivery method, the way that the support or development are being delivered becomes incredibly important. There are good ways of delivering it and not so good ways. For example, a lot of the research finds that cascade models are not necessarily particularly effective in all situations. There's also now a focus on the facilitators, those who are doing the support and development. It becomes incredibly important, the research is finding, that those folks have worked with teachers for a long time. Those folks have been teachers themselves, and that they know the context and they know the community very well. We're moving away from a focus on subject matter as a generic topic or pedagogy in general, and moving toward a focus on classroom problems of practice. And we're also beginning to see teachers as leaders. The research that's accompanied this work for that first paradigm wasn't very good at all. For the second paradigm, the research was mostly descriptive, and there was this focus on collecting attendance numbers, how many people were attending support and development activities. But what we've learned recently is that attendance doesn't necessarily mean folks are participating. And even if folks are participating, they may not actually be learning. And even people who are learning from the teacher professional development, that learning may or may not translate into actual change, teacher beliefs, and teacher practices. Additionally, most of the data collected have been self-report data. So we've moved more recently into a focus in research on moving away from process product studies to nonlinear understandings of how teachers change and grow. We have an emphasized call for longitudinal work that studies groups of teachers over multiple years to better understand how they change and if their changes last over time in relation to particular interventions or innovations. We have mixed methods research and qualitative research becoming more and more popular, and there's a real focus these days on researching teachers as deep, complex agents. Therefore, teacher identity studies and participatory action research have become popular of late. The third thing I want to talk about a little bit is teacher agency. Teacher agency I define as the capacity for teachers to act, to actually do something according to their own judgment and their skill and their training. In other words, to activate their knowledge, their skill, and their motivation in a way that engages students in authentic, powerful learning. Different kinds of teachers will benefit from different amounts of teacher agency, but teacher agency isn't only inside of the teacher. Teacher agency is a relationship between the teacher's internal characteristics and capabilities and the conditions that unleash those agentive potentials from a teacher. And so it becomes really important that people who shape the conditions in which teachers work ask themselves where their decisions are located on this continuum. There are tighter conditions that restrict teachers' agency. There are looser conditions that open up teachers' agency, and different teachers will benefit from different kinds of teacher agency conditions. And it becomes really important that we're constantly asking teachers if their conditions support them in achieving their professional goals. And so regardless of teachers' career stage or needs, supporting teachers means that we must ensure that teachers play an active role in setting the conditions in which they work. That leads me to the last slide here, which is to make the argument that including teachers as authentic partners in scaling and authentic partners in their own professional development carries an awful lot of benefits. The education reforms, in other words, the design, the development, the implementation of the reforms themselves will benefit from making use of teachers' experience, their perspectives, their proximity to students. Including them in this process will make the reforms better. It will also increase teacher support for the scaling or the implementation of the reforms. Teacher tie-in equals teacher buy-in. And then finally, including teachers as authentic partners in the process creates a natural system of teacher professional development and support. They can't help but grow and learn by being part of the process of their own education reform. And then finally, it establishes schools as a learning culture, not only for children, but for adults, for teachers as lifelong learners and professionals who grow over time. It seems to me that this is an important way both to support teachers and more effectively improve education systems. I know that was a lot. If you've got questions, please put them in the Q&A chat and I'll answer them in writing. I want to thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Brad. That was insightful and absolutely relevant to get us started. I know we might have questions from the audience. So I would request folks, if you have specific questions for Brad, please do add them in the Q&A box, and we'll try to take them in the Q&A box, or we can also bring Brad back later to take some direct questions. So thank you so much, Brad, for setting that context. I'm going to move us along now to invite our next speaker, Daniele Ressler, who's going to provide an overview of TaRL Africa's learning agenda and its significance in shaping teacher support initiatives in TaRL programming. Just to tell us a little bit about Daniele. Daniele is a director of measurement, learning, and evaluation at Teaching at the Right Level Africa. He is responsible for strategy and implementation of TaRL Africa's research and learning initiatives to support the scaling of TaRL across the region. Daniele also oversees programmatic measurement, monitoring, and review processes in support of high-quality data use and innovation during TaRL implementation. So welcome, Daniele, and over to you.
Thank you. I hope you can see my screen. I appreciate the chance to speak today. As Devyani mentioned, my name is Daniele Ressler, and I'm the TaRL Africa Director of Measurement, Learning, and Evaluation. I'll be speaking about, as she mentioned, our TaRL Africa learning agenda, and really thinking about particularly our 2024 priority learning questions and reflections on what we've seen and learned about in teacher support and mentoring to set the tone for the following speakers today. So TaRL Africa does prioritize being a learning organization. We're committed to research and program quality implementation in order to ensure that the TaRL approach maintains impact as it scales. This is critical to our addressing the learning crisis because evidence shows that when TaRL is implemented well, student learning outcomes improve. So how can we ensure the strongest delivery of TaRL in each new context and over time at scale? We invest in learning. After more than 5 years officially as TaRL Africa, of deeply supporting TaRL implementation during and at scale, we now invest particular time and particular resources into 3 types of learning. The first is efforts to understand and strengthen TaRL approach as it's being implemented. In other words, tweaking TaRL to make it better. An example of this is improving training delivery. Another effort is to adapt the TaRL approach, changing what we typically do. For example, modifying the original TaRL literacy program that was tested and came from India in order to incorporate dual language needs in sub-Saharan Africa. And the third effort is to design and incubate new innovations beyond TaRL, to integrate in government systems, and to reduce the need for TaRL by addressing root causes. For example, bringing TaRL principles into early grades. Ultimately, for us, the North Star guiding our learning is a commitment to increase impact and to generate cost-effective sustainability so that over the long term, children continue to learn. So how do we learn? This is a picture of an updated learning continuum that we use as an organization to guide our varied approaches to research and learning. The left side of the continuum represents learning activities to deeply understand and use data that is locally contextualized and informs effective TaRL delivery, such as conducting a language mapping exercise. As we have supported implementation at scale, it's also an increasing priority to quickly identify challenges in implementation through monitoring and reviews and feedback, and then to conduct quick, deep learning to understand root causes of the weak delivery or challenges with the program in a context. And in some cases, quick and simple course correction is enough. In other cases, adaptations are designed, refined, and trialed to address the persistent delivery or quality challenges. And often we find this is linked to specific contextual conditions. An example of this is remote mentoring in contexts where security, environment, lack of resources mean that mentors do not visit TaRL teachers. In some cases, we also are committed to testing more major TaRL adaptations within larger real-life conditions in order to use rigorous research and methods to understand broad implementation, fidelity, cost effectiveness, sustainability, or impact over time. We do also want to be a learning organization that contributes to the global education research environment. And finally, in parallel, we incubate new ideas outside of the standard TaRL, like I mentioned. We start with pilots and deep dives in learning labs. If the early stage innovations prove promising, then we try and follow a strategic pathway of scaling, adapting, and testing. Okay, so what do we want to learn about in 2024 and beyond? You will see here that we have our ambitious learning agenda laid out. The light green colors indicate 4 buckets of learning that we are particularly focused on. One is implementation and strengthening of TaRL. This is essentially learning that's focused on program delivery, quality, and improvement as TaRL is being implemented widely. The second bucket is sustainability and institutionalization. These are learning questions that are focused on ensuring long-term ownership of TaRL by government partners. The third bucket is impact and outcomes of TaRL. Here we're thinking about impact evaluations and long-term, proximate and primary outcomes. And then the fourth bucket is new innovations, as mentioned. Here we're looking beyond TaRL for things like early grades and what we can learn there. So taking you back to those yellow squares, within implementation and strengthening, there are 3 sub-areas that are fundamental to implementation of TaRL. At the heart of it is teaching and learning in the classroom. And then surrounding that is teacher support and mentoring. Surrounding that is governance and management. So this doesn't look like a nested relationship, but in reality, it is much more nested in our vision. So for the purposes of today, I will just speak a little bit more about teacher support and mentoring. Perhaps you are curious, maybe you would be interested to hear how we identified our topic areas. We, in the past year, conducted a deep dive and collected extensive feedback, literature reviews, and review of our data to identify what stakeholders that support implementation every day felt like they believed were key challenges in teacher support and mentoring. And so some of the things that have come up are on this slide here. what we ended up doing was consolidating this to identify what we're calling persistent challenges, which is what we see across multiple contexts, and therefore we believe should be particular priorities to address in learning. So here's the 4 core questions, taking into account what we know about effective teacher support and also what we know to be some of our persistent challenges. We consolidated 4 priority learning questions for effective teacher support and mentoring. Number 1, how do we adapt and improve TaRL training? We're very interested in exploring cost-effective training models and school-level training as 2 pieces that we see with promise. Second, how do we strengthen mentoring delivery and quality? Here we are interested to explore ways to improve the frequency, the reach, the quality, and the effectiveness of mentoring. We also are interested in the use of data to help prioritize targeting support to teachers. And we're very interested in what it means to mentor the mentors, to support the mentors themselves. Third, what means of continuous professional development and teacher support are effective? We want to learn about the roles that technology may play in CPD, and opportunities for peer and school-based teacher support, and ideal cost-effective packages of CPD. And fourth, how can we strengthen and motivate a sense of ownership of TaRL for teachers and school leaders? Here, we want to understand more deeply about implementation barriers, enablers, motivators, and opportunities to support TaRL teachers. Okay, so my last quick slide, because I think I'm at time, is that I wanted to just briefly reflect on a few learning reflections of our team to date that we've found from research and from implementation. So one of them is that in-person teacher support and mentoring is costly. Technology might support teachers and reduce costs, but we really lack data on effectiveness. So there's ongoing research to understand operational feasibility, reach, and effectiveness of remote mentoring, WhatsApp groups, videos for training, and a chatbot, among other things. Secondly, we need to revisit our assumptions on the level of support that teachers need in some contexts themselves when it comes to their own foundational literacy and numeracy skills. We've found that in some contexts, they're very low. We're piloting work to support the teachers to strengthen their own FLN basic skills, and we see a lot of promise there. And third, we have learned that quality training for mentors, it supports what Brad said, quality training for mentors within the traditional training cascade is so dependent on who provides it and how well. Given the importance of training for effective TaRL implementation, we're reviewing ways to strengthen practice-based elements, reduce reliance on individual trainers through videos, and similar efforts to really try and get at this challenge of training at scale. So the presenters, the speakers presenting today have all been working on different research elements around effective teacher support or understanding the needs of teachers, and that's been in partnership with TaRL Africa. While this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of learning, we do hope that you'll enjoy the reflections. Thank you. Over to you, Daniele.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Daniele. As the audience will appreciate a lot on our ambition to learn, to share, and to learn together with all of you. So thank you very much for sharing on that, Daniele. As Daniele said, we're now we've set the stage for some of our key speakers for today. So I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Morgan Kabeer, who will be taking us through some of the work that's been done on Zambia around teacher support. And Morgan is the engagement director at the Busara Center for Behavioral Economics, where she manages a portfolio of mixed methods research studies in education and youth employment across East, West, and Africa and South Asia. Before Busara, Morgan had experience in academia and financial services in both the US and the UK, as well as with the Peace Corps in Benin. So big welcome, Morgan, and over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Devyani. Just give me 1 second to share my screen here. Okay, just confirming that everyone can see my screen. Okay, great. Okay, well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to attend this webinar. As Devyani mentioned, I'm Morgan Kabeer, and I'm an engagement director at the Busara Center for Behavioral Economics. And I'm here with my colleague, Varsha Ashok, who will be answering some of your questions in the Q&A box during this presentation and after. So by way of an introduction, Busara is a research and advisory organization that advances and applies behavioral science in the Global South. What this means in practice is that we study why and how people behave the way they do, pinpointing the specific factors that drive their decisions and behaviors. We're currently partnering with TaRL Africa and VVOB to improve TaRL delivery in Zambia. TaRL is being implemented in primary schools across the country in grades 3 to 5 through the catch-up program, which is now in over 4,000 schools in 8 out of 10 provinces. We're using tools from behavioral science to conduct research on the beliefs, preferences, and motivations of teachers around the catch-up program. Teachers are ultimately responsible for delivering TaRL. If they use the TaRL methodology in their classrooms correctly and completely, then the evidence shows that on average, students will improve their foundational numeracy and literacy. However, teachers face many barriers to delivering high-quality TaRL lessons. Our study unpacks these barriers using a behavioral science lens. We are now using this information to design and test solutions that overcome these barriers to improve TaRL delivery, putting teachers at the center of our solutions. For the next 5 to 6 minutes, I'm going to present some background on our research, explaining our approach to studying teachers and why it's important to understand what drives their motivation when thinking about how to improve TaRL delivery. I will then present 2 key findings from our study to date on the behavioral barriers that demotivate teachers and influence TaRL delivery in Zambia. And to conclude, I'll discuss some of the next steps for our study, as well as the questions we should ask ourselves when designing and implementing solutions to support teachers. To deliver TaRL lessons, teachers need to acquire the skills to do so. They need to be able to correctly assess students' literacy and numeracy, sort them into groups accordingly, then teach to the individual learning groups while simultaneously managing the entire classroom. They must also have the opportunity to deliver TaRL lessons. In Zambia, the Ministry of Education requires that teachers hold TaRL lessons for 1 hour outside of regular classroom time. But in addition to allocating the time, though, teachers must also have the resources to deliver TaRL and the space to hold lessons. Much of our attention has been on making sure that teachers have the capability and opportunity to deliver TaRL lessons. VVOB and the Zambian Ministry of Education offer teachers several different types of trainings to make sure they are capable of delivering TaRL lessons. At these trainings, teachers are also taught how to make teaching and learning materials using low-cost and locally available resources, ensuring they also have the opportunity to deliver TaRL. But what if teachers don't use what they learned in training? And what if they don't hold TaRL lessons for the full 1 hour that they are supposed to? The COMBI model from behavioral science gives us a framework for answering these questions. According to the framework, capability, opportunity, and motivation interact to generate a behavior, which in our case is delivering TaRL lessons. Making sure that teachers have the capability and opportunity to deliver TaRL is obviously important, but it doesn't give us a holistic understanding as to why teachers may or may not be using TaRL methods in the classroom. We also need to consider whether teachers are motivated to use TaRL. To date, much less attention has been paid to motivation compared to capability and opportunity. So our study parses out the different factors that either motivate or demotivate teachers. We pay close attention to their beliefs and preferences, as these can have very real impacts on their willingness and ability to deliver TaRL. This is one of the key goals of our study. We wanted to identify the beliefs and preferences that teachers hold that can influence how they deliver TaRL lessons. We also wanted to explore how they can be leveraged or overcome to improve TaRL delivery. For today's webinar, I'll only be presenting 2 key findings from a phone survey we conducted with 2,000 teachers, although we uncovered many findings, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to quickly present two findings. We conducted this study with 2,000 teachers in Eastern, Southern, and Lusaka provinces from April to September 2023. In this survey, we identified the enablers and barriers to TaRL delivery from the teacher's perspective, focusing on enablers and barriers as they relate to teacher motivation. We also analyzed how enablers and barriers varied across our sample population. First, we analyzed how they varied by demographics, specifically by gender, giving us insight into the experiences of female teachers. Second, we analyzed how they varied by student learning, giving us suggestive evidence of how teachers' beliefs and motivations can directly affect literacy and numeracy. Using data from VVOB and the Ministry of Education, we determined the number of students who progressed to more advanced learning groups and acquired numeracy and literacy skills between baseline and midline. We then grouped schools into either high learner progress or low learner progress schools based on the number of students who progressed to more advanced learning groups over this time period. So from the survey, we found that self-efficacy is an important determinant of TaRL implementation, especially in teaching numeracy lessons. In our context, self-efficacy is defined as whether teachers feel confident and able to deliver TaRL lessons. As you can see from the quote on the screen, most teachers in general feel less confident teaching numeracy compared to literacy. But among the relatively few teachers who feel confident teaching numeracy, they were more likely to teach in schools with high learner progress in numeracy. These results suggest that teacher confidence is key to effective numeracy teaching. Our results also highlight important gender differences in confidence in numeracy outcomes. Across our entire sample, regardless of the learning group or the learner progress group, men reported higher levels of confidence than women. Since men report higher levels of confidence, and confidence is key to effective numeracy teaching and is positively correlated with numeracy outcomes, women may be at a disadvantage in teaching numeracy, largely because they lack the confidence compared to men. We also found that the vast majority of teachers reported an external locus of control when it comes to TaRL delivery. As you can see from the graph on the screen, most of the teachers in our sample attribute poor learner progress to external factors. They said learner absenteeism and parents who are either uneducated or unsupported are the primary causes of poor learner progress. Only 12% of the teachers in our sample reported an internal locus of control, meaning they attributed poor learner progress to internal factors that are in their direct control, like their own intention to put time and effort to teach TaRL lessons well. So those are just two very quick findings from our study, although like I said, we found many findings in our survey. And as you can see from our results, beliefs and preferences can either motivate or demotivate teachers. Motivation, in turn, can influence if and how teachers deliver TaRL lessons, which has potential downstream impacts on students' numeracy and literacy. As we saw, for example, teacher confidence is positively correlated with student numeracy levels. We recently took the findings from our survey into co-design workshops with teachers and stakeholders, where we brainstormed different solutions for leveraging enablers and overcoming barriers. We're currently in the process of testing these solutions. We hope to complete this testing by the end of this year, after which we will disseminate our results to the broader research and education communities. But before I conclude, I want to take a second to tie our research back to the theme of today's webinar, providing teachers with effective support. A lot of what I'm about to say will echo some of the sentiments that Brad has already made and some of the points that he had presented in his earlier presentation. Supporting teachers should extend beyond giving them training and providing them with resources, although I acknowledge that these are incredibly important and shouldn't be overlooked. What I want us to think about more critically is how motivation comes into play, in addition to considering capability and opportunity in line with the COM-B model from behavioral science. As of now, we don't have great insight into what motivates teachers to use what they learn in training in their classrooms, or what motivates them to use certain TaRL resources. When thinking about how to support teachers, we need to consider them as decision makers with a myriad of factors influencing their decisions, everything from lack of resources to lack of confidence. This, of course, requires us to understand their motivations. We can infuse this understanding into our solutions for supporting teachers, as Busara, VVOB, and TaRL Africa are currently doing with our research. And at the end of the day, this will make it easier for teachers to deliver TaRL lessons. So thank you, everyone, for your time and attention. I will now pass it back to Devyani, and please feel free to pose questions in the Q&A box, and Varsha and I will answer them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Morgan. This is the first time I'm seeing some of the results from the Zambia study, so incredibly insightful and useful. And I think it'll be great to hear reflections in the chat box or questions in the Q&A box. But if you have some reflections, feel free to keep them coming in the chat box. Moving on now, I'm going to introduce our next speaker for today. That's Dr. Andreas de Barros, Andy as we know him, who will be discussing the factors that lead to instructional change, drawing from the qualitative research in Zambia. Andy is the assistant professor at University of California, Irvine School of Education, specializing in program evaluation and evidence-based education policy in less developed countries. Prior to the University of California, Irvine, he was a postdoctoral associate at MIT's Department of Economics, where he worked with JPAL. So welcome, Andy, over to you.
Thanks so much, Devyani, and it's great to be here with everybody today. As Devyani mentioned, I've been working with Teaching at TaRL Africa in this research partnership since 2020. We've come a long way, so this is exciting for me to present some of this work to you today. Most of the work that I'm presenting today is based on a mixed method study, and I want to shout out here to my co-authors Jacqueline Natenge and Janita Henry, who are part of this research. So huge thanks to them, and then huge thanks to many more. This is usually the last slide, but I want to put this first because many people have been involved in this research over the years. I want to start with maybe shocking you a little bit. TaRL certainly has been celebrated as a very successful program, but I think I want to highlight one thing that Daniele said before in her presentation, that says TaRL works if and when it is being implemented well. Right? What I'm showing you here in this table is that many times actually TaRL, if implemented at scale, is not successful. It can be successful, but many times it has been found not to be successful. So in this table that I'm showing you here, I'm showing you multiple rows of different studies. The first row here is a class after class size reduction, kind of like a tracking study that has nothing to do with TaRL, but that's just an initial motivation. It can work to group students along with their ability, right? And following this work and motivated partly by that, different TaRL interventions as studies in India have often, however, found a null effect. Right? And that was in Bihar, in 2 different implementation models where even on the measure, the Busara test that is being used by the very intervention, the TaRL intervention, there's null effects on that. Right? Then trying this again in Uttarakhand, a null effect on that. Right? Only in Haryana has there been a positive impact in one of the 2 subjects that was the subject that was focused on by TaRL in that particular study, where there was a positive effect of 0.2 learning levels on the Busara test of that intervention, which is about a 5 percentage point improvement of the percentage of kids who can read a paragraph or like a story. Right? And then in Ghana, also part-time supported work in Ghana, did have some positive effects after 3 years, but these effects completely went away after 4 years, right? So more often than not, actually, when there's TaRL implemented by teachers in schools without outside support, so no contract teachers being included, no additional volunteers, no learning camps that support the programs outside the program, TaRL is often, if you implement it just with teachers, just in government schools, more often than not, TaRL actually has not been successful, right? Which really leaves us with this conundrum, right? Like we know TaRL can be successful if it is implemented with fidelity and with high intensity, but more often than not, you try to introduce it in schools and it's actually not implemented well, right? And in those cases, no surprise if it's not implemented well, it has null effects, right? So this leaves us really with this question: what can we do to support teachers better to make sure that it is being implemented? Right? So context for this work here, where we actually asked this question, is the Zambian implementation model. I'm not going to spend too much on it because we just heard about it. So this is the model where teachers are implementing TaRLs in schools. There's no such outside supports like volunteers or learning camps or contract teachers or so forth. The teachers are actually implement TaRL with 1 extra hour of instruction daily in the Zambian government schools and also in community schools to some extent. So this is grades 3 to 5. And again, this is through this 1 extra class per day, which was actually in the Haryana model, possibly that magic ingredient that helped in the Haryana model to have a successful intervention of TaRL, right? But given that still, there's this motivation to say, how can we further support teachers and make sure that this is implemented well, knowing how fragile these impacts of TaRL can be, right? So this is where we started then in this multi-year research process, starting out by asking this question back in 2020, 2021, what drives teachers to change their instruction, right? Then understanding these main drivers of how and what drives teachers to change their instruction, innovate and come up with support interventions that tap into these main drivers of instructional change, right? build these new teacher support systems together with Teaching at Level Africa and DVOB, their local partners in Zambia, together with the ministry, try those out, pilot them in 2022. And right now, actually, we are coming towards the end of a very large-scale randomized control trial where we actually layered this additional support system on top of the basic TaRL intervention, right? And in a few months, I'm so excited to say that we're going to be able to present the results of that very large-scale randomized control trial, which is, by the way, the first randomized control trial that TaRL runs, TaRL Africa runs at an at-scale program, in this case, the national program that's called Catch Up in Zambia, right? So I have like 5 minutes to present you some of these findings. Right now, this is a little bit like old findings for me, but I want to share this, like how we, what we found when we asked, what drives teachers to change their instruction, and then want to share a little bit about these innovations that we built around those findings. Right? So we went in with this qualitative study, and I'm going to post a link to that study and just ask, like, what provokes Zambian teachers to change their instruction? So we collected qualitative data for this around with about 78 Zambian educational personnel, and just really asked them, have they changed their instruction, and if so, and like, what kind of professional development activities have they been exposed to, and try to get at like what drove them to change their instruction. We analyzed this data in two ways, which I thought was kind of cool back then, both qualitatively by hand, but we also started using machine learning and language models to actually help computers help us wrangle with all that text data. By now, ChatGPT came around, and we're actually going to be even more power to do this kind of work. But think about 3 years ago, we started with this, and we actually combined these two things, which I thought it was quite exciting to see how we interpret the data versus how a computer analyzes text. What did we find? We found that there can be a very successful model, hopefully, of initial offsite teacher training that is done by offsite events that is then, however, combined with school-based teacher development. And that school-based teacher development taps into team-based problem solving and verbal encouragement, which were kind of like the two main drivers that came out of the qualitative work. So, kind of tapping onto what Brad said, like teachers, when we asked them what drives the change in their instruction, we heard a lot around, them telling us about, engaging with their peers, solving problems together with their peers, engaging with their schools on site. So I think there's real potential, and we thought there's real potential to combine what teachers learn in offsite training with that kind of problem solving and collaboration and encouragement with peers on site in schools, right? And as I mentioned, we then took these findings and built innovations around that inside that tries to promote that kind of problem solving and verbal encouragement in schools, and are currently testing that out in this large scale trial. So just to give you some feedback, again, this comes from qualitative work in Zambia. It's just 12 schools, but we basically went in and in-depth asked this question, whether before the COVID-19 crisis, whether teachers had changed the way they taught and how. And then we asked them around their exposure to professional development activities, and then basically just correlated these two pieces with each other, both qualitatively and quantitatively. But then really what came out from that finding is, that, yes, the kind of like the hard skill and that, like, how to do things anew, like the information of the program, often they got from offsite training, but then the actual change of like what happens in the classroom really came from this kind of like problem solving and engaging with their peers in schools, right? So I'm gonna skip some of this, but as we came to these findings, we asked ourselves, like, how can we promote this on-site problem solving? We built this continuous professional development intervention that is currently being tested out that really taps into this. So it has multiple components, but they're all really asking themselves, like, how can we promote this engagement with peers, joint problem solving, and encouragement, verbal encouragement from peers in schools, right? So this is the system that we're currently trying out in Zambia together with the Ministry of Education, which is a combination of integrating professional development around TaRL in Zambia's continuous professional development meetings that teachers are supposed to do in school, providing instructional materials and so-called mastery challenges, along with a calendar of things that TaRL would like to see in terms of change in the classroom. So in a given week, TaRL Africa knows exactly what they'd like to do in a given week. In that given week, teachers receive mastery challenges and additional support materials, and they're given a challenge to solve in that given period, right? If they do so, their performance on that challenge is then fed into a recognition system that it has both, just praise and recognition, but also is then combined actually and connected to the national recognition system that the ministry has in place, right? And all of that system is, supported by communities of learning where we're supporting these teachers through WhatsApp groups. So we have a little bit of a tech component as well here. As I mentioned before, this is currently being tested out in a 2-year randomized trial that's now coming to an end. Very excited to say that we have this across 182 zones. We're testing out a comparison of ketchup versus no ketchup, which just tells us about the effect of TaRL in Zambia. But then in each of these zones, we also have a pilot school where we're testing out this new continuous professional development program for teachers. And we're going to present these results towards the end of the year. Thanks so much. And I'm going to paste a link to both slides and the paper that we have around that in the chat, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Andy. Thank you for sharing that. And just heads up to everyone who's attending, we will take permission from the speakers today to send you a copy of their slides, and we will be sharing a recording of the webinar as well. So you can look out for that after today's session. So thank you very much, Andy. Also, I think for me, the first time seeing the more recent insights from the Zambia study. So thank you very much for sharing today. And I'm sure there will be questions for Andy, so please keep them coming in the Q&A box. So moving on now to our last speaker for today, who is Dr. Vikram Kamath Cannanure, who will be talking to us about some of the innovative approaches to teacher support using technology, which have been tried out in Côte d'Ivoire. Vikram is the postdoctoral researcher at Saarlandes University. He's exploring using AI to assist marginalized communities in the global south. His research developed collaborative tech for teacher development in rural Côte d'Ivoire, which he's going to talk to us about today. His work, influential in sustainable technology, spans several countries and is recognized at leading HCI conferences. So welcome, Vikram, and over to you.
Thank you, Devyani, and happy to be here. Let me share my screen. Okay, can you all see my screen? Okay.
All good.
Cool. Okay. So as Devyani said, I'm Vikram, and I'm here to present some of the work that I did in Côte d'Ivoire, where we built a chatbot to support teachers implement TaRL. So our project was a collaboration between TaRL and Carnegie Mellon University. And TaRL at the time in 2018, I believe, had found some initial success in the Ivory Coast with some pilots on the TaRL program and was interested in scaling. So our goal was to find a way to support teachers with technology. Unfortunately, there were existing challenges, and there still are some of these challenges in infrastructure and technology that make this problem very challenging. For example, a small number of teacher trainers, you can see the teacher trainer on the right, support up to 20 schools. So traveling physically to these schools regularly is challenging. Also, on the technology side, it's not clear what technology would be appropriate and how often would teachers use these technologies. So through a few years of qualitative work, like the project in Zambia, we worked with teachers and we interviewed them, and we learned that a smartphone-based chatbot could be a possible direction. Most teachers had smartphones, and they could connect to the internet at least once a week. However, we learned that a traditional chatbot design could not work in these contexts. So if we were to expect the trainer to help the teachers with the chatbot, um, that was not practical because trainers were themselves busy to motivate teachers on another intervention. Trainers also had, in some cases, lower access to phones, and teachers were more interested to meet trainers in person. So in more pilots, we learned that teachers already supported their peers. There was a strong peer support or community support among the teachers. We also learned that teachers wanted to be trainers, or it was the long-term goal to become trainers. So they were already role-playing as trainers by motivating their colleagues informally in their classroom. So we piloted a system where teachers could support each other through a chatbot. For example, if one teacher had a challenge, they could read stories from another teacher in the community to seek some motivation. So, in a sense, this idea was to treat teachers as um, uh, uh, co-designers of the technology to some form. And we also were interested to learn if these community support designs had some impact. So we had two versions of the chatbot. So in one region, we shared our community version, and then in the other region, we shared the traditional version of the chatbot. We deployed the system to 120 schools, and over 400 teachers used the chatbot for a year. So we had pre-tests and post-tests before and after the intervention on teachers' motivation, knowledge, and we were also learning how teachers were using the chatbot. So in summary, we learned that the community support was slightly more impactful for teachers' motivation. And we also saw that active chatbot users were more motivated and also learned more on some components of the knowledge. Although teachers in the community condition used chatbot more, there was no significant changes in the usage. So to summarize, we learned to design interventions familiar for the teachers, such as WhatsApp or chatbot, for example. But we also need to provide ample technology training to support teachers in these novel interventions. Second, we learned uh, that teachers aligning interventions with teachers' long-term goals or the aspirations can have impact. And one example of this is community support or peer support systems where teachers were supporting each other. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody, and I'm open to questions now. But before I end, I just want to thank uh, so many people who made this project possible over many years. And thank you again for listening.
Thank you so much, Vikram. Thank you so much for sharing. I know there will be many questions, especially with the technology angle in the work that is being trialed in Côte d'Ivoire. So thanks once again for sharing on that. And as a reminder to the audience, please add your questions in the Q&A box so that the speakers can get to your questions. If you have reflections, feel free to share them in the chat, but any questions that you have, even if it's a simple question, do add it in the Q&A box so that we can ensure it gets answered. So obviously a lot to take in with all those presentations, and I'm going to now invite back our speakers for today and hand over to Daniele to take us through a quick discussion with some of our speakers, following which we will try to take some more questions, but do keep your questions coming in the Q&A box. So I'd like to invite all our speakers back on video. Yeah, so over to you, Daniele.
Great, thank you so much. Really appreciated the presentations, and I hope that the thread of different approaches and different learning questions and different moments in time on how to effectively support teachers and what teachers need, hopefully that's coming out. We're excited to hear about some of the results of some of this ongoing research as well, and we'll be sure to share it when it is ready. So we are now moving into a panel discussion for approximately 15 minutes, and I have a general question directed to our speakers that I've asked them to think about. If you can just give a 3 to 4 minute answer, we'll have enough time for everyone. The question that we'd like to hear from each of you is, what is promising to you in effective teacher support as we look forward? And I'm bundling 2 questions in one. And what are implications for policy or change in current practices, such as assumptions that might be based on assumptions of teacher support? And I will also put that in the chat box, that question. So I'm just asking about, what do you find promising in effective teacher support as you look forward? And what do you find to be implications for policy or change in current practices and assumptions about teacher support coming out of what you've learned? And there's no particular order, or I will call on someone unless someone has a response they'd like to jump in on. Okay, let's start with Morgan.
Thanks, Daniele. So in terms of promising ways to support teachers, I don't think that at this stage, the answer is necessarily one big intervention that's going to come in and solve all of our problems that we're going to implement. I think it's more of subtle changes to the way existing programs and the way programs are implemented. So a lot of what we are looking at, both kind of at Busara as an organization, but then also with our study, are small nudges that we can use to encourage teachers to use TaRL methods in the classroom. But then also, beyond just thinking about these small little changes that we can make to programs, we're also thinking a little critically about, behavioral design more broadly, looking at ways to incorporate behavioral science into the design of these different programs. So where we're at right now with our study, and I didn't really have time to get into this in my presentation, but we have done some co-design workshops with teachers, brainstorming some really high level ideas to overcome some of these different barriers that we found that kind of, leverage the different factors that motivate teachers, and thinking more critically about how to infuse that into the design of the catch-up program to make it a little more centered around the teacher and centered around their beliefs and motivations. So Varsha, if you have questions on them, Varsha can answer in the chat because she's been really leading the charge with the design of these interventions. But what we're thinking about right now is different ways to implement recognition systems, even if that's something really basic, ways that we can use things like social norms to give teachers better recognition that gives them a little extra motivation. We're also looking at the information that we're providing to teachers and how different levels and amounts of information can then inform their motivations and behaviors. And one of the things that we're also looking at too is incorporating teachers more in the decision-making around the catch-up program to make them feel more accountable and potentially overcoming some barriers with external locus of control that we found that I'd mentioned earlier. So we are in the process of testing these. I don't have any definitive data on if these solutions are actually effective. But we are looking at ways to incorporate these elements into the catch-up program. And it's important to note that these interventions and these different solutions and small nudges came from the teachers. So we made sure that we conducted different brainstorming exercises with different groups of teachers doing co-design workshops, which are essentially like focus group discussions that are a little more open-ended, and you facilitate a lot of brainstorming to make sure that the interventions that we were designing and testing were really rooted in their realities. And I think that's been a really great approach for us for this project. So Daniele, to answer your second question on the implications for policy, and I'm sure Brad will probably have something similar to say, because I know our presentations were kind of advocating for similar things, involving teachers more in decision-making, involving them more in solution development has been really promising, at least for us on our project. Teachers were amazing co-design participants. They had so many great ideas. They were really engaged in the process and also really appreciated the opportunity to voice their opinions. So I think as we think about policy changes, thinking about the ways these different programs are implemented, we should get teachers more involved and really think more about what their different motivations are and what their experiences are, and then incorporate that into program design. Over to you, Daniele.
Well, thank you so much.
Would you like me to call on someone?
Yeah, why don't you?
Okay, well, Brad, since I mentioned you, I'll pass it over to you.
Sure, I'll pick up where you left off, which I do think, as I said before, it's absolutely imperative to engage the teachers as authentic partners in this work. In answer to your questions, I feel like the research is pretty clear around a lot of these things. There's a real need to prioritize innovative professional development and support models, not keep doing the same ones that we've done for the last 15 years, which didn't work very well, but to try new ones out and to study them at scale. We know that it's easy to do professional development and support at small scale, but when it comes to large scale, it's incredibly difficult to do this work. You have trade-offs between cost and sustainability, between efficiency and impact, between visible quick wins and equity. And so really thinking through what it means to scale innovative and effective models becomes important. Secondly, I think it's incredibly important to focus on who is facilitating the professional development and the support. That's another thing where I think the research is relatively clear. Unless we prioritize the facilitators and make sure that these are folks who've worked with teachers before in these locations, who've been teachers themselves, who really can understand the experience through the eyes of the teachers, we may continue to get lackluster results from our promising innovation methods. The other thing is and this is where it sort of moves into policy, attend to the whole system of teachers and teaching. I think it's time to move past the idea of believing that we can take on one little part of the system and without understanding that the system as a whole will wash out or will co-opt one single innovative reform or innovation, and to think about what it means to actually coordinate and integrate and put together multiple innovations that take on multiple dimensions of the system of teachers and teaching. That requires a new way of thinking about policy. It requires leadership, it requires coordination, it requires collaboration, it requires courage, and importantly, it requires moving away from the project mindset that has dominated the space for 20 years and moving into a scaling and a systems change mindset. That's what I think.
Thank you so much, Brad. Vikram, do you want to speak?
Sure. Thank you. And they were great answers. And I guess from my side, what is promising in terms of effective teacher support, and I think because I work with technology and we've seen some change. In the right conditions, a technology can have impact, but setting up these right conditions is incredibly hard. But teachers today are using social media like WhatsApp and Facebook, which also allow us to customize and tailor these interventions in technology to the different contexts. And I think a core piece, as others mentioned, is trying to understand and involve teachers in these designs early on. For example, we spent quite a bit of time in the classrooms before we started writing our first line of code or thinking about technology. And I think I also would like to echo with Brad here. I think getting teachers involved, like facilitators or who might also have exposure to technology might be something to consider. And I think, one thing that we are seeing, one theme that we are seeing is peer support. So the trainers and the existing hierarchy of the education and ministry may not be fully supportive in some contexts, but there are existing support systems that teachers use, like their friends, their colleagues, and it might be interesting to see how we can translate these support systems into technology. And I mean, implications for policy, I would say, like, even if we go with a technology, I think it's important to involve teachers and also train them. And this training can be formal, but also we might also require informal support, like throughout the year from their peers, or it could be like technology experts who could be teachers in the community who are better at using technology. So in short, I think, if we consider technology as the direction forward, it's important to train the teachers and set up some ecosystem where they can seek support on to relearn the technology if needed, and have somebody to support them throughout the year. So with that, I guess I'm done. I guess, Andy, if you're left.
Yeah, thanks. What I'm excited about, or what I find very promising in terms of teacher support, is like a very focused approach that targets concrete instructional practices, concrete things that you want to see in the classroom, that you can then check whether these things are happening, yes or no. Right? I think a lot of the continued professional development is around, even here in our conversation around, motivation and some knowledge or general. No, like I really like Brad's graph where it starts with the instructional core, and you can really focus on whether certain instructional practices are happening, yes or no, right? Then you can have multiple ways of getting to that, right? Maybe if you change, use a technology approach, maybe if you use like a motivational approach, fine, right? But at the very core, there needs to be an instructional practice that you want to see changing, and you have to have a very clear idea of what this is, right? I'm excited about this in the study that we have, because with the professional development program, BVOB, Ministry of Education in Zambia, TaRL mapped out very clearly what is supposed to happen in a school year in a teacher's classroom, right? Have a very concrete idea, for example, what is supposed to be happening in the first weeks of the program in terms of, let's say, grouping and assessment, right? And then there's a calendar of activities. And in a 2-week period, there's concrete activities that target exactly what is supposed to happen in that classroom, right? Then all of the professional development in that 2-week period is focused on that, right? Assessment and grouping, right? So out of the window, all of these like, motivational and broad scheme things, right? Everything is focused on that, right? And there's this clear question, how can we bring about that instructional change? How can we make sure that these things happen, right? Now, in terms of assumptions that I would like to see challenged is whether these things are actually happening. And I think, again, I think kudos here to Petam and TaRL Africa to consistently question that and be open about this and just testing out whether these things are actually happening, right? Because more often than not, as I mentioned before, they're not, right? They're not happening, right? So really, I think we're in a good path here, but I'm just going in and saying like, oh, this is evidence-based and it works and it worked here and therefore it worked there also. No, right? Often it doesn't happen because of implementation challenges or because of things not happening in the classroom. But like, as long as you stay focused on that question, does the instructional change actually happen in the classroom? I'm very optimistic.
Thank you all. I have a reflection coming out of that. And that's just in terms of linking this back as well to even our own learning agenda as TaRL Africa. I think that there's a really important piece around thinking forward about research and research at scale, emphasizing the importance of both a deep dive descriptive commitment to understanding what is happening on the ground and the experiences and potential barriers that many actors in the system face. And at the same time, consistently measuring implementation so that we understand and we don't conclude that the program doesn't work, but we rather refocus to see what is it that needs strengthening, what are the barriers, and can it work if those barriers are addressed. I would say observing from some of the different contexts that TaRL has been implementing in so far, each context has its own conditions with challenges. And so what works to overcome those challenges or even to just support and facilitate can look quite different. And so this ability to consistently think about both how to explain well and understand in research moving forward on any program that's looking at something that has an evidence base at scale, and also to understand where things can go wrong so that there's really a focus on strengthening, system strengthening and support. That to me is just a reflection that came out of hearing some of the different feedback. And so I'll be really interested. There's going to be more research that's coming out in the near future. And I feel like the thing I'm very interested in as someone who also has a research lens is to really get a better sense of some big data that will help us see what's happening as we continue on this journey of scaling TaRL in different conditions and contexts. So that's a reflection. Unless I'll stop for a moment and see if anyone else has a response on this or a further comment in the panel.
I just want to say something quick about what you're saying and maybe extend that. And I think you're absolutely right. And to support the kind of work that you're talking about, I really believe that it requires that we emphasize and we support qualitative research and even ethnographic methods to sort of get at the complexity of what this looks like in locations, longitudinal work that I've mentioned before. And part of the thing about ethnographic work is participant perspectives. What does teacher change look like through the eyes of the teachers and those who work with them? What do these new innovations, what does TaRL Africa look like in practice through the eyes of the participants? And how can we better understand ways to support them to engage these kinds of promising initiatives such that it's equitable and that it lasts the test of time? And then the last part here is, and this is something that I applaud groups that are doing this well, is a real need for candidness. I know that there are incentive systems such that a lot of groups want to hire researchers who feel beholden to pointing out the benefits or the successes of a particular intervention. But I also think it requires that we be really candid about where the work is succeeding and where it's failing. I just wanted to share that. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. Any other comments from the speakers before we wrap for today? All good? Okay. Great. Thank you so much. A big thank you to all our speakers today, Morgan, Andy, Vikram, Brad, Daniele. Thank you very much for making time. Big thank you to our audience. Before you go, we still have about 10 minutes to go. So I'm going to give the speakers some breathing space to respond to the questions in the chat. There's still a lot of questions. So please do take the next 5 to 7 minutes to respond so that everyone has has got their question answered. As we wrap up, I'm going to request my colleagues to share the Menti again so that we can gather some reflections from our audience today. So what are some of your main takeaways? I know some of you very kindly put some of your main takeaways in the chat, but would be great if you go to menti.com, enter the code 45516858, or click the link that Tanvi has just posted in the chat and tell us what are your main takeaways from today's webinar. What did we learn? What are we going home with? What are we taking back to our work? What are we taking back to think more about? It's always very useful for us to see reflections. We have many, about 150 plus audience members who stayed with us throughout the webinar today. So getting some of your insights is going to be very useful. As we wrap up for today, we're also going to see a quick video that has been recently developed on teaching at the right level on the work in Uganda. So for those of you who'd like to see the video, please do stay on till the end. But till then, what is your main takeaway from today's webinar? Menti.com 4551 6858. Great. Thank you so much for the insights. And again, big thank you to our speakers and to the attendees. And a reminder again to stay on for another 5 minutes if you'd like to see a quick video on teaching at the right level in Uganda. Yeah, great to see some of the takeaways. I didn't realize TaRL does not have the same impact when delivered by teachers. I think TaRL has varied impact when delivered by teachers. In many cases in India, we do see the same, in fact, sometimes better impact than in some direct implementation. So I think there is a lot of experiences from implementation that can tell you more about that. Motivation is important in teacher capacity development and delivery. Of course, quality and experience of facilitators must guide their selection as trainers. Yes, I think as far as possible, but in many contexts, we sometimes have to do the best with what we have. Yeah, teacher motivation is as important as student motivation, if not more. Yeah, shifting away from project focus to nationwide implementation ensures a trade-off. Definitely many trade-offs, not just one. So yeah, very interesting insights there. So keep your insights coming. We will have all of this written down. It always helps us in our work as well. And this time we'll share back the results from the Menti with the recording as well. We had a request last time to share back some of the results from the Menti. So we will be sure to do that this time. Takes a different mindset to have changed at system level. Yeah, moving from project to system. I like that that's coming out many times. Gender issues, we saw that very clearly from Morgan's presentation, absolutely. TaRL, if well implemented, is the best equalizer in need of motivation for teachers. Yeah. Yep. Great. Peer support is powerful to teachers. Great. So thank you so much. Keep your insights coming. The Menti is open, so feel free to keep sharing. Before we share the video, I want to say thank you once again to all of our speakers. Thank you for making time. Thank you for being with us today. And thank you to the audience. And now I'll hand over to my colleague to share this video and we'll wrap up. Thank you.
Where bright smiles meet eager minds, there's a powerful movement that's changing the lives of millions of children. Welcome to the story of teaching at the right level.
Most children in Africa are going to school, but the unfortunate bit is that the learning does not happen.
The vast majority of children of primary school age in the region do not have basic reading skills. So teaching at the right level meets them where they are. The approach tailors teaching to the child's individual needs, ensuring that no child is left behind.
Teaching at the right level as an approach comes to help the child catch up on where they have been left behind and ensure that they can be able to get the basic foundational literacy and numeracy skills.
Now, for us, we are glad because TaRL has helped now. We have identified them who are behind, and this approach is helping them to be brought on board.
The approach isn't guesswork. It's rooted in evidence. Research tells us that when children receive instructions at their current learning level, learning outcomes improve. Kids thrive. Their confidence soars. Their skills grow and their futures become brighter.
This program is helping these learners to know how to read and write, to express themselves in the community.
It motivates them to always at least be at school because it is enjoyable. Because of this program, at least there is an improvement now. The learner doesn't want to miss out.
Alikuwa mwalimu mzuri, ungichelewa kwa masomo, hata kimbila kukupiga kisi baba chini wanapiganaka na ueleza shida. Ndio vitu venye alikuwa nifurahisha hapo vile.
You would see the teachers are usually very happy and glad to see that they can transition almost 100% of the learners into the mainstream.
And the impact speaks for itself. By 2023, teaching at the right level was being implemented by organizations and governments in 13 sub-Saharan African countries and has reached over 5 million children in sub-Saharan Africa. But this isn't just about numbers. It's about the faces behind those statistics.
Mimi nazipenda nisome mzuri, nikuwe daktari.
The parents say that the child has been able to gain confidence as well as the ability to stand in front of the church and be able to read the Bible verse. So to me, I felt like indeed TaRL is doing something.
The journey of a child's education can be a challenging one, but it should never be one they walk alone. The Teaching at the Right Level Africa initiative ensures that these children are surrounded by a supportive community of love and learning. Join us on this remarkable journey where education has the power to change lives. Together, let's make sure that every child in Africa and beyond gets the chance they deserve. Because when you teach at the right level, dreams come to life.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Hopefully, we got the opportunity to answer all the questions. If we didn't, sorry, do reach out to us. We'll try to connect you to the speakers. And we will be sharing the recording, the links, the link to the video, and hope to see you at our next webinar, which we will share details of again in a follow-up email. So thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for staying with us. And have a nice evening.